As I mentioned in a previous video, the Republican special counsel investigating whether President Biden mishandled classified documents concluded his probe and declined to bring charges. So what should otherwise be an unambiguous victory for the president is undermined because that same Republican special counsel spoke inappropriately at length, taking cheap shots at President Biden's mental state and memory. And now Republican politicians and right-wing media are running wild with it, and we've got to talk about it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, full disclosure. As I mentioned in this previous video, I'm struggling with a cough. I've got this big Ohio canvassing event this weekend, so I hope I recover. So if I sound strange, just bear with me. We have several clips to look at in which Democratic congresspeople with legal backgrounds, like Dan Goldman, and former Justice Department prosecutors, people who actually worked in the FBI and the DOJ, they weigh in on what Robert Hur, the Republican special counsel, did because it was wildly inappropriate. Let me play this first clip, and we'll unpack it together.
As you know, he concluded that while he was not going to bring charges, President Biden, in his view, willfully retained classified information. But one of the reasons he's not bringing the charges is because he thinks Joe Biden is too old and feeble, essentially, for him to prosecute without the jury finding him sympathetic. What's your reaction?
I don't buy that that's a reason why he didn't prosecute. That's completely extraneous and unnecessary, delivered by a Republican trying to make a political statement that has no place in this special counsel's report. The bottom line is that President Biden cooperated fully. As soon as he and his team identified that there were classified documents, he turned them over. He allowed the FBI to search every room in his house. He fully, completely cooperated, and there just simply wasn't evidence that he knowingly and intentionally held classified information with any intent to distribute it. Juxtapose that to Donald Trump, who went to such great lengths to obstruct the FBI's, first the archives, then the FBI, that he was charged with obstruction of justice, which demonstrates a clear knowledge and intent.
And all of this was, to be fair to Robert Hur, the Republican special counsel, all of that was noted in his report. He was very clear about the fact that Donald Trump's situation, if the allegations are true, is infinitely worse than what Joe Biden was alleged to have done. So these things were acknowledged. But in Dan Goldman's perspective, and I'm inclined to agree, he's a Democratic congressman, he's a former prosecutor, Robert Hur's comments were extraneous, they were unnecessary, they were inappropriate, they were unprofessional. And as you see throughout the remainder of these clips, that's going to be a recurring theme from these former prosecutors and former DOJ experts. This is Congressman Jamie Raskin also weighing in.
Whereas this Republican special counsel said that Joe Biden had been completely forthcoming and cooperative, and they're not bringing any criminal charges against him. He did take some gratuitous slaps at Joe Biden because of his age, and a lot of these kind of age discriminatory and age insulting remarks are getting rather tiresome. All we really need from a special prosecutor like her is a decision whether there's any legal grounds to move forward. He said there's not, and he didn't need to take all those cheap shots. And obviously you could take the same kinds of cheap shots at Donald Trump, who recently confused a woman that he sexually attacked and then lied about with one of his wives.
And we'll play that clip just to put it in perspective too. But again, Jamie Raskin saying the same thing, that, you know, these comments are wildly inappropriate. Before I play some more clips, I want to point out that in Robert Hur's report, he includes a letter that was sent to him by President Biden's personal attorneys. I think it was Bob Bauer and Richard Sauber, in which these concerns rather were brought up. So they say, we do not believe the report's treatment of President Biden's memory is accurate or appropriate. The report uses highly prejudicial language to describe commonplace occurrence among witnesses, a lack of recall over years-old events. Let me just bring the screen up here. Such comments have no place in a Department of Justice report, particularly one that in the first paragraph announces that no criminal charges are warranted and that the evidence does not establish Mr. Biden's guilt. If the evidence does not establish guilt, then discussing the jury impact of President Biden's hypothetical testimony at a trial that will never occur is entirely superfluous. In fact, there's ample evidence from your interview that the president did well in answering your questions about years-old events over the course of 5 hours. This is especially true under the circumstances, which you do not mention in your report, that his interview began the day after the October 7th attacks on Israel, In the lead up to the interview, the president was conducting calls with heads of state, cabinet members, members of Congress, and meeting repeatedly with the national security team. And folks, it goes on like this, and they offer examples and rebuttals of how Robert Hur does not use this sort of language to describe any of the other witnesses, even though other witnesses who were deposed in the investigation also struggled at times to remember certain things. So like, why is it that the man who is under the most amount of stress during the time of his 5-hour voluntary interview, you go out of your way to insult his memory, insult his recollection, and suggest that he's a dotard, and yet you don't do anything like that with anybody else? To say nothing of the fact, and this is also important, President Biden did not offer executive privilege, or did not invoke, executive privilege over any of this, right? Whereas Donald Trump tried to conceal and squash so much of his various investigations, and again, we'll get to that. President Biden was completely forthcoming, even with a report that essentially insults him at various points. Now, I want to play some other clips. These are from Andrew Weissman and Neil Katyal, who are former DOJ. These are not politicians, but they are former DOJ prosecutors. This is what they had to say about Robert Hur's commentary.
So I have very strong views on that based on the model that James Comey set, where somebody there, Hillary Clinton, was not being charged. Sounds familiar. Yep. This is not being charged. And yet a person goes out and gives their opinion with adjectives and adverbs about what they think. Entirely inappropriate. That is not the role of the Department of Justice. I don't even understand why you would engage in, just as a prosecutorial matter, your memory today is irrelevant. Whether I find you in an interview to have forgotten things, certainly to say, what do you remember about certain documents in your house, 4 or 5 years ago, I would understand that you might not remember that. To talk about your memory today, irrelevant. It is gratuitous. And it is also exactly what you're not supposed to do, which is putting your thumb on the scale that could have political repercussions. Your decision is essentially, to the vernacular in the Department of Justice, is put up or shut up.
So you have a career DOJ official saying that, if Robert Hur was going to, decline to press charges, it was completely gratuitous and unnecessary for him to basically go out of his way, like, just as James Comey did in 2016, during that election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, to almost try to justify it for political reasons. Like, hey, I know this is going to be unpopular. I know this person's controversial. I'm declining to press charges. So I guess to compensate, I'll go out of my way to talk about how much they suck and I hate them, I guess to make you or I feel better about my decision. It was inappropriate then. It's inappropriate now. Here's now Neil Katyal, another DOJ alumni, weighing in on this.
He's come up with a clever way to get those adjectives in there by saying, well, if I brought this case to trial, this is what I would face from a jury. But as Andrew says, totally gratuitous. I mean, after all, earlier in the report, it says Biden had all sorts of innocent explanations for his behavior. So
there you go. That's another thing. Again, what's often being neglected is it's not Robert Hur even saying that the only reason that he can't bring charges is because he thinks that, Joe Biden could present himself, again, as somebody struggling with memory. There were plenty of reasons that went into Robert Hur's decision to not bring charges. But to put this in perspective, because again, you got to compare, right? MAGA Republicans, MAGA cultists, and right-wing media are going to run with this. I want you to take note of what a tremendously embarrassing mistake Donald Trump made while under deposition. It was referenced in a previous clip.
I don't even know who the woman, let's see, I don't know who, it's Marla.
You're saying Marla's in this photo?
That's Marla, yeah, that's my wife.
Which woman are you pointing to? No.
Here.
Carol.
Oh, is that,
the person you just pointed to was
I
Eugene
see.
Carroll.
Who is that? Who is this?
So know what he just did. First, he's like, I have no idea who this woman is. Oh, never mind. I'm sorry. It's my wife. Yeah, it's definitely my wife, Marla. Oh, no, actually, it's the woman, Mr. Trump, that you were accused of sexually assaulting, right? That's Donald Trump. So again, just to keep that in mind, when Republicans want to talk about embarrassing mistakes made while under oath, you can point to that. And we actually have video evidence of it. So it's very easy to share. As CNN reported during the Mueller investigation, Trump said he could not recall, remember, or recollect more than 30 times in written answers under oath. And by the way, this isn't a problem that's exclusive to Donald Trump, apparently fellow Republicans, much younger Republicans, P90X CrossFit Republicans also seem to struggle with this as well.
I don't recall tweeting that, no.
Okay.
I don't remember. That's difficult to answer.
Okay.
I just don't remember who tweeted what. I'm sorry, I don't know.
So it's Marjorie Taylor Greene back in 2021 or 2022 when she was under investigation. It's a 1.5-minute long compilation of all the various times she couldn't remember things when asked. So folks, this is where we are. The last thing I want to point out is this. As Chris Hayes pointed out, it's interesting how Bill Clinton, a Democrat, was investigated by Ken Starr, a Republican. George W. Bush, a Republican, was investigated by Patrick Fitzgerald. A Republican, Hillary Clinton, a Democrat, was investigated by James Comey. A Republican, Donald Trump, Republican, was investigated by Robert Mueller, Republican. Joe Biden, Democrat, was investigated by a Republican, Robert Hur. Hunter Biden, of course, the son of a Democratic president, investigated by a Republican. Why is it that anytime anybody needs to be investigated, Republican or Democrat, it must be a Republican investigating them? Isn't that kind of strange? Maybe that's something that in the next, if President Biden wins re-election, that maybe we could start shifting the goal. You know what? Maybe it's not just Republicans who are equipped to investigate Democrats and Republicans. Maybe Democrats can investigate Republicans, or maybe Democrats can investigate Democrats as well. The bottom line is this. Joe Biden is not being charged. That should be the top line news. The Republican special counsel did not believe the charges were warranted or required, and he did not believe that even if he brought charges, that he could make the case beyond all reasonable doubt. That's all important. The political ramifications for Robert Hur's very inappropriate comments, and apparently disputed by President Biden's attorneys, about Biden's mental fitness, that's going to be the top line story, not just in right-wing media, but also even in mainstream media. They're talking about it nonstop and often leading with it because it's sensational and it generates clicks. The only reason we're talking about it is to refute it, okay? It was inappropriate. Robert Hur is not a neurologist. He's not a psychiatrist. He's not in a position to do these things. It's completely outside his remit. You have lifelong veterans of the Justice Department even weighing in on it. And all it does is just feed a narrative. It sure looks like it's a Republican going, damn it, I can't get him on the law. So I'll hit him in the proverbial ribs on the way out as a cheap shot. That's what this looks like. And if it comes up, just know that if we're going to suggest that Joe Biden is somehow less equipped to run a country because of these comments, we've got plenty of examples of Donald Trump, including that one time where he saw a picture of a woman, said he didn't recognize who it was, then said it was his wife, and then it turned out it was a picture of a woman he sexually assaulted in a Manhattan clothing store in the 90s. Food for thought. Let me know what you think in the comments.